morning, TreviPay teammates, and to our esteemed guest, Mr. James. Welcome to our Diversity Week 2021. My name is Kevin Monka. I identify as he, him, and I'm a national account manager in the Overland Park offices here at TreviPay. In addition to my duties as a national account manager, I'm also proud to serve as a member of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion team, working with education and development initiatives. Today, it's my honor to introduce and welcome former mayor of Kansas City, Missouri, Sly James, to the call. So welcome, Mr. James.
Good morning, Kevin. How are you?
I'm well.
Good.
So Mr. James comes to us as a passionate supporter of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and has a long history of successes that go beyond his long, successful mayoral career in Kansas City, Missouri. Sly's worn many hats over the years, from lead singer to band to military police officer, successful trial attorney, and award-winning author. As the president of the Kansas City Metropolitan Bar Association, in 2003, Mr. James started organizing the leaders of various firms to support diversity and put together a diversity initiative. This effort continues today and drives diversity across both the Kansas City area and our region. First off, Mr. James, thank you for joining us on Veterans Day. We appreciate your service and thank you for joining us on this momentous occasion.
Kevin, it's good to be here with you. I'll also add that it's the Marine Corps birthday today, so Semper Fi to any Marines in your audience.
Absolutely, and happy birthday to those Marines, the Marine Corps as well. Thank you for joining us this morning and agreeing to share your unique insights with us. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to you. I'm going to stay tuned here and we'll jump in at the end of the presentation with a few questions. But with that, I'm going to turn things over to you to feature your presentation this morning.
No worries, and thank you very much for being here. I'm always happy to talk about this subject. It's an important one, and I think one that is very much misunderstood. A lot of people look at diversity as a zero-sum game. If somebody else wins, then I lose. That is far, far from the case. I've been blessed to be exposed to diversity and engaged in diversity my entire life. It's been one of the best things that ever happened to me and for me. When I was a young person, 9 years old, my parents moved from Kansas City, Kansas to Kansas City, Missouri, primarily to put us in parochial schools. That was really my first exposure to people of a different race. I had lived in Black neighborhoods and my friends were Black, where we shopped was Black, everything. And during the course of that time, we were taught various things about white folks. When I went to Kansas City, Missouri from KCK and entered parochial school, was my first real in-depth exposure to people who were white, who were not like me. I was in an integrated parochial school and made very good friends, some of whom are my best friends today. My oldest friend is a guy that's still here in Kansas City. We still play some music together. But after high school, I had the pleasure of going to Bishop Hogan High School. That was a very unique experience. I still lived in a Black neighborhood, but when I went to Bishop Hogan, my first 2 years at Bishop Hogan, I was the only African American in that school of 600. And during the course of the 4 years, an African American female moved into the district and into the school. And so there were two of us in the group of 600. I had adjustments to make, not just at the school, but back in the neighborhood, because during those times, I found myself somewhat schizophrenic. During the day at school, I was amongst all white folks, and during the evenings and weekends at home, I was amongst all Black folks. So I found myself carrying messages back and forth between the two groups, trying to dispel some of the myths, the misnomers, the superstitions, the impressions that people had grown up with by being, first of all, a representative of the opposite, and by second all, having discussions with people about what was true, what wasn't true, and what might be true. It was a strategic point in my life. It prepared me for the next major adventure in my life, which was the United States Marine Corps. After high school, when I graduated in '69, the band continued to play for a while until I was about to get drafted. So rather than being drafted and have a 100% chance of going to Vietnam, which a lot of my friends from my black neighborhood were going to, not many from my white neighborhood, to be quite honest. Um, I decided that rather than take my chances of going to Vietnam with the Army, I'd rather go to the Marine Corps like my father had done, like I did, and frankly, my son has done since, um, and be a Marine as opposed to being in the Army. It was a stark, eye opening experience for me. I grew up in the '60s. That was a period of turmoil, kind of like it is today. A lot of racial tension. Civil rights movement was in full blossom. Social revolution was in full blossom. The anti-war movement was in full blossom. All of those things created levels of conflict outside of your home and inside your home. And navigating those nooks and crannies of conflict was an important part of my development. When I got to Marine Corps boot camp and found myself surrounded by people that we all were surrounded by people that we didn't know, came from different parts of the country, had different religious beliefs, had different political beliefs. We were forced by the mission and by circumstance to figure out how to get along with each other, to figure out what was important. And when you narrow it all down and you strip away everything, one of the things that I can tell you is that when you're focused on making sure that you stay alive, you don't really care what color the person is beside you. You don't care where they came from. You don't care about their religious beliefs. What you do care about is whether or not they have enough respect for you to protect you in situations of danger and to help save your life as you would help save theirs. We were forced to join together as a cohesive unit. We worked under circumstances and under Marine Corps philosophy. If one person failed, the entire unit failed. That situation carried with me for the rest of my life. The fact that we're all interconnected, the fact that we're all interdependent, the fact that regardless of how we look, what we eat, what music we like, who we want to marry, or any of those things that people seem to find so divisive these days, really don't mean anything when it comes down to life or death. So right now, I think that this country is in a not necessarily a literal, but certainly a rhetorical life and death situation with whether or not we're going to continue to exist together. And if so, what we're going to have to do in order to get there. One of the things about the Marine Corps that I found most impressive was that over a period of time, you learned that there really weren't the differences that people thought they were. When you're living in a barracks with guys that you've not met for 13 weeks, when you're out on patrol or maneuvers with guys that you've not known very long and they're different than you, and you start talking to them and you get to know them and you eat with them, you bathe with them, you work with them, you run with them, everything that you do is with them. All of a sudden, you start to realize they're really no different than I am. But I did learn some other things as well because I hadn't been exposed to a lot of things outside of my own neighborhoods and schools. I got to eat different food, listen to different things, hear different philosophies. And those things carried with me for a long time. They became exceptionally important when I went into office and in other periods of time, particularly during the practice of law, but very much so during the time that I was in the office of mayor. One of the things that I learned about the Marine Corps, we had a couple of mottos. I learned two things that have been instrumental in guiding me through life. One, I learned from my father, a very simple saying that you can't go wrong by doing right. The other was the Marine Corps motto of improvise, adapt, and overcome. And we need to find more ways to improvise what we're doing now and how we approach situations and people. We need to adapt to changing circumstances, and we need to overcome the obstacles placed in front of us. Um, After the Marine Corps, I came back home, went to college at Rockhurst, and then went to law school at Syracuse and the University of Minnesota. And I had a fellowship at Syracuse that required me to take a course in African American literature. every semester. And I decided that because that was taking away time from my true pursuit of law, I would transfer to Minnesota. But while I was at Syracuse, I had a young individual from Iowa challenge me in a class. It was a class where we had a very raucous discussion about a constitutional issue. And basically, this young guy said to me, "You're only here because of affirmative action." I challenged him on that quite vociferously, as you might expect, and asked him what his GPA was. Mine was higher. Asked him what his college GPA was. Mine was higher. And I said, well, you do understand that affirmative action applies to geography, and maybe they simply needed some dumb kid from Iowa to fill out the ranks as much as they needed an African American from Kansas City. We became friends after that. He understood something that he had previously not understood, was that affirmative action wasn't simply for African Americans. It was meant to diversify the entire ranks. Affirmative action also applied to women. It applied to people of different geographies. It was one of those things that was never truly understood by folks, never, and the mission was misconstrued. It was people who thought that it was a zero-sum game. You get in, which means I don't. They thought that if that were the case, then there was a reason to be antagonistic towards those who they perceived as having gotten some advantage over them. That's simply not the case. I went to a Black Law Students Association meeting when I was at Minnesota. And I went to the first meeting, and I saw that it was African Americans, it was Native Americans, and Latinos. And as I was walking to my second meeting down the hall, two white guys were walking beside me, and I asked them where they were headed. They told me they were going to the Balsa meeting, and I said, "That's cool. Why are you going? Generally, don't see you there." And they said, "Well, we want to be part of the solution." So when I got to that meeting, they were turned away. And I argued with the organizers of the group that why should we turn away people who are empathetic, who are wanting to be involved in solving the problem, who want to be allies? Why would you turn your back on an ally? It was there that I realized that if you have ever been the victim of discrimination, the very last thing that you should ever want to do is be the perpetrator of discrimination. So that was my last Balsa meeting. I decided I was not going to be part of a group that discriminated. I hold that to be one of my baseline things now. I refuse to participate in discriminatory acts either directly or indirectly, which is one of the reasons I don't buy Chick-fil-A. I'm sorry, I just don't. It may be good chicken, I don't know. But as long as they have ideas that people who are gay are less than, I'm not going to give them my money. I won't shop at certain places where I know that they discriminate for one reason or another. And I don't care whether the people who own the store or the operation are black or white. I refuse to engage in discriminatory acts. After law school, I was fortunate enough, after a number of interviews around various places, to land with Blackwell, Sanders, Matheny, Weary, and Lombardi here, a large law firm in Kansas City, back in 1983. I was the first African American they hired for anything, word processing, secretary, anything. I had a very unique experience there. Bill Sanders Sr. was a senior partner who was on trial during the time that I interviewed my initial time, so I had to go back and see him over the holidays after I accepted my offer. He took me into his large corner office, sat me on a couch while he sat behind his desk and talked to me and told me that he had plans for what my area of practice would be, and we had a great conversation about that. And then he did something that I found very heartwarming and was told was exceptionally unusual. He took me and introduced me to every single person who was present in that law firm that day, which was his way of saying he's all right, he's with me. He brought me back into his office and sat me down again and said, if anybody gives you any trouble about being black, You let me know when they're fired. And I said, well, gee, boss, I'll tell you, I've been black a long time. I can handle it. So he never had to fire anybody about that. And we had some conversations with people in the firm from time to time. I did rather about various issues related to race and diversity. And they're still my friends to this day. I also remember a time when, because he and I had similar habits, I would go home as an associate. You're required to work a lot of hours, a lot of hours. It was kind of your calling card. If you weren't billing a lot of hours, then you really had no place there. It was one of the things they looked at when they were making partnership decisions. So I had a family. So I would go home in the evenings, have dinner, wait until everybody went to bed. Then I'd go back to the office and work into the early morning hours. And that was fine. I'd done similar things when I was in the Marine Corps, so it wasn't a big stretch. And one night, Bill Sanders is there, and he was usually there at weird hours like I was. And we were in the break room having a cup of coffee, and he said, hey, do black people and Mexican people get along? And I said, I don't know. Why don't you go ask some? And during the conversation, I said, well, why? That's an awfully strange question. And he says, well, I've got a trial, and the other guy on the other side is Mexican, and so I thought I'd take you to trial with me. And I thought, okay, you really don't know what you're saying here, so let me try and tell you how that hits me. I said, you want me to go and be window dressing for you so that it'll look like you are something that you really aren't. I'm not going to do that. However, if you want me to go to trial, I'll do that. But I insist on doing something in the trial so that I'm not just there looking black. I have skills, and I'm going to demand an opportunity to hone those skills under your tutelage. And that's exactly what happened. And after that, he and I became trial partners on a number of different cases. During the time that I was at Blackwell, it was pretty obvious to me, since I was in one of the larger white stocking firms, as they called them at that time, um, that everybody knew who I was. I didn't know who everybody else was. I was somewhat of a raisin in the milk. Um, but because of that, I was very sought after to be on boards and various things because A, I was an attorney, and B, I was a black attorney, which was rare. Um, I took note of the fact that there weren't many people like me. As a matter of fact, during the first 5 or 6 years I was at Blackwell, I was really the only African American in one of the top 10 firms in Kansas City. That started to change with the law firms becoming more focused on diversifying their ranks. And I noticed that once I made the recruiting team at Blackwell, that we insisted on going to the same schools as everybody else. Everybody wanted to go to Harvard and Yale and Stanford and Mizzou or wherever they had come from. And they had some criteria of looking only at the top 10% of the graduates for their firms. And whenever they talked about women, Latinos, or minorities, they always would say, we're looking for qualified women, Latinos, and minorities. And I pointed out to them one day that that word qualified never appeared in front of white. And I challenged them on that. And I also challenged them on, if you're looking for the top 10%, why aren't you going to schools that have a much higher enrollment of Latinos or women or blacks in order to find those top 10%? And over a period of time of being in recruiting, I noticed that all the firms were doing similar things, but nobody was coordinating anything. And what happened was the firms would find two or three people and then fight over them as to who was going to actually be able to hire this person. But those efforts were haphazard and inconsistent and non-productive. Not only that, they failed to recognize that it's easy to recruit. You can recruit people. You can offer them enough bells and whistles and flash to get them in the door. The problem is retention. That's true of law firms. That's true of any business. You can get them there, but if you have a culture that is not accepting of who they are and willing to bring them into the ranks and treat them with equal levels of respect and dignity and opportunity, they're not going to stay. They're going to move on because as much as you wanted them in the door, other people did too. they will have options and they will move on. And the firm started to notice that they were losing their minority lawyers and a lot of their women lawyers after 3 or 4 years, because a lot of them did exactly what Bill Sanders was going to do to me: bring me in, showcase me, but give me no real work or responsibility. Kind of a token situation. So when I became president of the Kansas City Metropolitan Bar Association in 2002 and 2003, I looked at this and had a conversation with the other officers and said, I want to start a diversity initiative. And the diversity initiative has to employ some of the principles I learned in the Marine Corps. And that is, we are all one unit. Our mission is the same. And in order for us to accomplish that mission, we need to band together and work together in order to diversify our ranks. So we created the diversity initiative. It was really modeled on Columbus, Ohio's diversity initiative, which was in full blossom and very successful. And we started the Heartland Diversity Job Fair. And the job fair was exceptionally successful because of the way we structured it. First of all, we offered scholarships to get people into town from across the entire country. We managed, after we signed the diversity initiative, we had 28 signatories. Those 28 law firms sent their recruiting people to the job fair, and they would make hires on the spot or bring people back in for other interviews and hire for their summer classes, whatever the case may be. So now all of a sudden we're accomplishing several things. I believe in systems thinking. And by systems thinking, I mean you have one problem, find a solution that addresses not only that main problem, but other problems as well. So now we are exposing Kansas City to people who had never been here. We were exposing firms who had not been very good in diversity hiring to diversity hiring practices and techniques that were successful. But we were banding together as a legal community that built camaraderie and civility. And one thing that we all know today is that civility is in short supply. One of the things about the Kansas City Metropolitan Bar Association and the members of that bar association is that we have a reputation for being able to go to war during trial and then go have a beer afterwards and sit and talk and get along. That's very important because it's a lot easier to work with somebody you're not wanting to kill. And because we have that reputation and because we have that ability, we are able to resolve problems easier, quicker, more efficiently, and at lower cost than people who argue and fight about every single thing. So that was exceptionally important. I'm really proud of Kansas City Metropolitan Bar Association. We just had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, did their podcast. We had in our original plan that we would revise it every 5 years. We wanted to get rid of the things that weren't working and add in things that were working and check our progress and make course corrections. And they have now revised the diversity plan for 3 times. The job fair is still going strong. We have more law firms participating than ever. The numbers of minority, women, Latino, gay lawyers is increasing. We're not any place near where we want to be, but we're a hell of a lot further than we were. And it's all because a group of white senior partners and managing partners of law firms decided they wanted to make a change. Now, the reality is part of that change was because of morality. They knew it was the right thing to do. I find it difficult to know lawyers, people dedicated to righting wrongs, people dedicated to being able to think over both sides of a problem and come to solutions. I find it difficult to think that lawyers can be ignorant about issues of race, but they indeed are, just like everybody else. The things that we gnaw against on issues of race are embedded in us long before we ever get to law school or into law practice. But they were willing to make the changes and do some things that were necessary to get that done. So we banded together and the numbers started to increase and it became successful for everybody. The other benefit of it is that after they recognized that the recruitment part was the easy part, but the retention part was difficult, then they started to make changes internally. And the result of those internal changes has been significant. Number one, By having more diverse workforce in the law firms and in businesses, you're able to attract different clients. There are a lot of people who want to seek out firms that look like them. And that includes African Americans, that includes people of different religions, that includes gay folks, that includes everybody. A lot of them want to do that. But if you're a law firm, you want a large client base. And in order to attract that client base, you have to look like your clients do. And one of the driving forces in that was Walmart. Walmart basically issued an edict that they would not continue to retain law firms who did not diversify those ranks and were able to present lawyers of skill and color and sex and gender um, on their cases. And all of a sudden, there was not just a moral imperative, there was an economic business imperative to diversity. And because the firms recognized that and other businesses came on board with those same attitudes, all of a sudden there was a much greater need, much more urgency to diversify. That's true across the country now. I don't know if anybody pays attention to commercials. I usually fast forward through them because I seldom watch anything live. However, when you look at commercials now, note the differences in who's in those commercials. There are a lot more commercials where African Americans, gay folks are being highlighted in normal everyday activities, getting married, going to work, raising families, not just selling chicken or decorating or whatever else stereotypes people can place on people of different hues, stripes, colors, and situations. But they're showing people in their real life form. And the reason for that is because we are integrated in this country, whether people want it to happen or not. And we need to find ways to come to terms with it. And the best thing that can happen in terms of coming to terms with those types of situations is to educate ourselves. So I've set on a path of trying to educate myself as well as trying to help educate others as well. When I became mayor of the entire city, not just the 28, 29% that was black or the 18, 19% that was Latino or whatever percentage was gay or whatever percentage was women. I became mayor for the entire city. And the first thing that I wanted to make sure of was that I had a diverse staff. So I had people from all walks of life. I have to admit, it was kind of heavy on women. I like working with women. They seem to be much more efficient in some of the things they do, and they bring a whole different attitude to the table, much more conciliatory, much more willing to negotiate, much more patient, less macho than men can be. And when we're negotiating the things that we're negotiating, doing the things that we wanted to get done, building a streetcar, the best streetcar system in the country, building a new hotel, getting a new airport, doing the things that we wanted to get done, negotiations were in great demand. My chief negotiator was my chief of staff, Joni Wickham, who is now my business partner. She was intimately involved, and I saw situations when I was with her that I thought needed to be corrected. Quick story. When I first was elected, we had the day after the election, we had the breakfast, traditional breakfast to bring everybody together and get unified. I sat there and I was eating those cold eggs at the chamber with the stiff sausage. Um, and I was asked to come to a meeting afterwards of the quote business leaders of the city for two reasons. Number one, the current mayor had checked out on the negotiations with Google. They needed me to get involved in those. And number two, a major business, AMC, was leaving, and they were going to try to talk them out of leaving. So they wanted me to come as the new mayor and bring a little gravitas to the issue. Well, what was interesting was I knew the CEO of AMC. He was a Latino. We used to get together and drink scotch all the time. I'd see him probably every other Friday night at JJ's down on the plaza, and we'd sit and talk and drink scotch and talk about whatever the subjects were at the time. So when I went to the meeting of business leaders, number one, it was all white male. The only women I saw in that meeting were women who worked at the bank where the meeting was held, who brought things in and took things out, brought in coffee, water, and stuff, and took papers and other things out. They did not participate in the meeting. I thought that was odd. Number two, other than me and the newly installed president of the Economic Development Corporation, we were the only African Americans. There were no Latinos. And I thought, well, that's really not very good. You've got a Latin CEO that you want to talk to and convince that they should stay, but you brought nobody who is his people. You brought nobody who shares their experiences or culture. So when he walked in, he looked around the room. He saw me, he made a beeline over to sit by me, and whispers in my ear, "It's mighty bright in here," which meant nobody like us. I started telling people after that, I'm not coming to any more meetings. I'm not going to participate unless there is more diversity in your ranks. I told the magazines that published the top 40 whatever, and they wanted me to come and do something with them. I said, I'm not going to come and put an imprimatur on your photograph of 40 white guys in skinny jeans. You can't tell me that the top 40 young and up and coming business people are all male. There's not a woman here. There's not a Latino here. There's not an African American here. When I give speeches, I'd stand in front of the crowd and I'd say at some point, I want you to stand up and I want you to look around the room. Then I want you to tell me who's not here. Then I want you to tell me why they're not here. And the next thing I want you to tell me is what you plan to do about it. Now, some of those groups actually listen. Others, yeah, not so much. But some of them did. But if we see things that aren't right, if we see things that aren't balanced, if we see places that lack diversity, those of us who believe strongly in that have some obligation, responsibility to call it out. And that's what I did. And that was part of my role as mayor. But I also recognized that I could not lead a city of diverse people unless I had diversity in my staff, but also if I did not understand how different people thought about different subjects. So I made it a very big habit to engage with everybody, regardless of their social status, regardless of their race, regardless of their sexual orientation, regardless of gender, regardless of any of those artificial lines that we place on people in order to categorize them and make it easier for us to try and figure out who's who. And that was exceptionally important because if you are a mayor of a city, unlike national politicians, the mayor of a city, the first job is to bring people together in order to accomplish very specific goals. You cannot do it if you are working from a point of division and separation. You cannot get 51% of the people to vote to raise their own taxes 3 times for an infrastructure project across the city if they don't believe you, if they don't know you, if they have weird thoughts about you. You simply can't do it. So in order to get things done, I know that you have to be able to work with other people. But even more importantly, if you want a rich life, then you absolutely have to get outside of your comfort zone. Just imagine if you went to a restaurant and the chef only used one ingredient. That's it. All right. After a while, you'd stop going because it's kind of bland. It's not giving you anything new. It's not adding anything to your life. You've tasted it once before. Hooray, I've done it, been there, done that. Why do it again? But imagine going to a restaurant where you have a variety of things on the menu, some spicy, not spicy, some vegetables, some proteins, all different sorts of things, and you can pick and choose. And you can put together a plate that has all sorts of things that you like on it. Some that you haven't tried, but you're encouraged to try, and you say, I like it. I didn't think I would, but I like it. So as a byproduct of being in the mayor's office, one of the things that I got to do was I got to go to different churches. Okay. I went to black churches, I went to white churches, and generally I didn't find many churches that were both. Most of them were one or the other. I went to Latino churches. I went to churches where there were heavy populations of folks in the LGBT community. Um, I went to churches where there were female pastors, and I went to churches where there were Roman Catholic priests who don't marry. So, all in all, I got to experience diversity of religion in a way that I'm not sure that everybody does. And as we look at how we proceed through things, we are trying to find a way to build uh, community. That's what it's all about. And you can't have a community if one side or the other thinks badly about the other side. You have to have a community that is willing to cross over lines that are on streets and in neighborhoods and join together in order to make the whole situation better. That's what business has to be about today. We have to absolutely positively understand that there is a moral imperative and there is an economic imperative. And if you don't like the moral imperative, then at least act out of your own economic self interest. Businesses that are more diverse are much more likely to be profitable than businesses that are not. Businesses that are more diverse are much more likely to be longer lasting than businesses that are not. Businesses that are more diverse have all sorts of unique opportunities to solve problems in ways that businesses who are not diverse are not. Imagine again if you have a business of all black female engineers. They're going to approach every problem the same way. But once you inject somebody else in there and you inject an accountant in there, you inject some other folks in there, you inject different races in there, now you have a conversation about all the angles that may have been missed. I learned early as a mayor that I could have my own thoughts, but before I would put my thoughts out there, I needed to know how other people would react to it. So I needed to be willing to listen to people say, I think you're wrong, or I think you're right, or there's a different way of doing this, or have you thought about this, or have you thought about that? Those are things that make for strong business decisions. Test your decisions before they hit the street. And that way, when they hit the street, they're much more bulletproof than they would have been otherwise. So the bottom line here with issues of diversity, and frankly, I like the word inclusion more. The word diverse sounds too much like divide to me. So I like inclusion because that's really what we're talking about, right? Bringing everybody in, bringing everybody to the same table, doing the things that are necessary to make sure that we're comfortable with each other and that we understand each other and that we understand that regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of things, we all essentially want the same things. If we're family, we want to take care of our families. We want to make sure that our children are educated. We want to make sure that we have decent jobs and that we can go to work with dignity. We want to make sure that we're not poor. We want to do the same things. We all bleed the same color red blood. At the end of the day, knowing that and internalizing that and building it into your lives in an intentional way, not happenstance, but an intentional way. So I challenge people from time to time. I've got black friends. Really, when's the last time you had them over to your house for dinner? When's the last time you went to their house for dinner? Why not? Because really, when you think about it, a lot of our contact with people of different races, genders, and beliefs takes place in the workplace. Then when we go home to our own sterile environments where we're comfortable. We know our next door neighbors, most of whom look like us, send their kids to the same schools as us, drive the same types of cars as us, out mowing their lawns on the same day as us, all those things. But that's not what life is about. We only get one shot at this whole thing. And it would seem to me that we're better off adding as much variety and as much pleasure into our lives as we possibly can. And a lot of that pleasure can be derived by having people in our lives who are not like us so that we are experiencing different things and understand that even though they're different, that doesn't make them bad. Now, two things before we go. You want to put up the slide for me about equity and equality?
Absolutely. Let me go ahead and share my screen on that.
This slide is important to me because we spend a lot of time talking about equality and that move to equity. But I want to point out the reality. The reality is that we haven't really hit equality and equity yet. We're moving closer and closer. But those are not the end points. Liberation is the end point. And I say liberation because it's shown very starkly here that liberation is when the barriers have simply been removed, and you don't need to provide extra crates for somebody to stand on to see over the wall. That's what we're looking for. And when you have liberation, you have a society that is functioning at its highest level, and that includes the economic levels as well. If everybody participates in the economic activity of this country, then there is per se and in reality more economic activity. More economic activity is good for everybody, not just good for the people who've recently entered, but if you have more economic activity and people have more opportunities to take care of themselves, then less and less money is necessary for other forms of ways for them to be taken care of. Less government spending on programs in order to level things out and to provide equality or to provide equity. Liberation means everybody's got a fair shot at being down there on that field and playing, or at least watching the game. And when that takes place, we're all better off. Now, the problem is that all of that requires some change. So now the next slide, please. So this is one of my favorites because one thing I learned in office is that people don't like the way things are, but they absolutely hate change. But they always clamor for change. They always say they want change. So then it's like, well, who wants change? Everybody wants change. Well, who wants to change? Who wants to change? Not many people want to change. And then when you get right down to it, who wants to lead the change? Nobody. Well, let me tell you, every one of us has an obligation to lead to change. We should never condone conversations, jokes, comments that are demeaning to someone else. We should never condone people who treat women poorly, who talk about African Americans poorly, African Americans who talk about blacks poorly. None of that. I refuse to sit through those conversations, and not just will I leave, but I'll say something about it. And if more people stand up and say, you know what, that's not right. You're absolutely wrong in what you've said. It's discriminatory. It's harmful. I'm not going to be part of it, and you shouldn't be either. And I'm not going to participate in it, or nor will I come back and participate in the future unless and until you understand the error of your ways and how hurtful what you have just done or said is to other people. Those are the types of things that I think make for strong people, strong communities, strong families, strong businesses. If we don't do those types of things, then we are simply saying, yeah, I heard it and it might not be my thing, but it's okay. Let's just let it go on. And until we are willing to make the change and lead those changes by our actions, then we're all going to suffer. So that's it for me. Kevin, I know you have some questions. I'd love to try to be of help in answering them.
Absolutely. Thank you, former Mayor James, for your insights and this wonderful feedback on many of the different projects that you're working on. Now, this first question here, you may have touched on in some of the pieces of the puzzle already throughout the presentation, but over your long and successful career, how has embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives helped you to drive positive outcomes for your teams and projects that you've been a part of?
I'll just pick some things from when I was mayor. I think that's the most obvious. When we are looking to do an infrastructure bond issue, for example, then that requires everybody in the city to pay taxes. And that means we have to be willing to show every part of the city why that is important to them and why they should contribute to that effort. And that means that we have to talk to folks in neighborhoods that are Black and Latino and white and upper class and lower class and all the things in between. It's important that when we show up in a way that is not threatening to them or a way that doesn't put them off. So we always had a team of diverse people that was talking about the issues and going out and visiting people about those issues. Without diversity, then it's really just a matter of can you get past the stereotypes that people come to the meeting with. With diversity, we have a foothold that we might not have otherwise ordinarily had. And as I said before, the job of a mayor is to bring the city together to accomplish very specific tasks. And you can't do that if you don't look like the city that you want to have accomplished those tasks. So we were very engaged in all sorts of various community events and programs. I was not only a member of the Kansas City, Missouri Chamber, I was a member of the LGBTQ Chamber and other chambers as well, because it's important for me to have conversations with people and to have friends in various places and to be able to find out what they're thinking. What are the needs of the people that I have been elected to serve? And that's what it is. I am a public servant. And as a public servant, how do you serve people that you don't know, don't look like you, and you're not willing to talk to? Or people that you have these in-baked, outmoded, ridiculous, stereotypical ideas about, and you can't get over that. You can't serve people that you don't respect. And people who don't respect you don't want you to be serving them. So it's a matter of building respect. And we built that by establishing a staff that was diverse, by doing things that recognized the diversity of the city, making sure that we looked at the specific needs of one place versus another and tried to address those needs in ways that fit with their culture, fit with their location, fit with their economic circumstances. So everything came down to being diverse and looking like the people we were trying to serve.
Awesome. Thank you for that feedback there. I'll move on to the next question. Now, TreviPay is in an exciting period of growth right now. Any suggestions on how we can best embrace our diversity and continue to win together?
I'm going to imagine that TreviPay, like a lot of businesses, work in groups or teams or departments. Before we can talk about diversity and inclusion, we have to, we must settle on a common vernacular and vocabulary. People must understand that this word means this and it's universally understood, at least in our group, that's what it means. Because if you say, quote, racism, there are going to be people who have a very wildly different attitude and response to that word than others. So what does it actually mean? And can we agree that it means? Number two, you have to establish a no blame zone. A lot of folks, a lot of white folks feel put upon because when racism is talked about, they think it's all directed at them as a result of slavery or what have you, and they weren't involved in it, so why should they feel like that? It's not about that. There's no blame here. But if you're not willing to listen to why people feel the way they do, then why should they listen to you feel about how you feel about you do? Develop a common vernacular, have conversations without blame, then take concrete actions. It's not enough to work with people. You have to actually understand them, and understanding them means you need to understand what they're like outside of the office. We all have this shell that we put in to go to work, and then when we go home, we're different. What's wrong with having dinner? What's wrong with going to their church? What's wrong with people trading off and going different places? Have your kids get together and play. See that the kids, it's amazing. Kids that have been brought up without overt racism tend to play with other kids without any racism at all. Kids are like that. They're innocent, they're pure, and they don't see the differences. What they care about is, are you nice to me? And if you're not nice to me, I don't care what color you are, I don't want to hang with you. And if you are nice to me, we can get along. Do those things. Bring people together in different ways outside of the workplace so you actually get to know them. Sample their culture. Invite them to sample yours. Break down these barriers. Start a book club. I really believe that part of the educational process has to be that we all read some things that are important to each of us. And with the number of books that are on the market, we should be able to find books about the white experience, the black experience, the Latino experience, the gay experience. Start a book club. Have conversations about what you learn in those book clubs. Sit down and read and participate with your people that you work with. And when you go back to work, I guarantee you, I absolutely guarantee you, if you do some of those things, you will find that your whole approach, your whole feeling about the people you work with changes. It gets better, it's more enhanced. You're much more hooked into them. You're much more willing to go the extra mile for them, and they are willing to go the extra mile for you. Why? Because now we understand and like each other. Before, we were just work colleagues. I do my work, you do your work. We say hi in the hall, we have a cup of coffee, we talk about the Chiefs game, and that's it. Now we're talking about, you know what, I was at your church the other day and yada, yada, yada. Or the kids, can we get the kids to play together on Saturday? I'm having a barbecue at the house, come on over. And all of a sudden, you've broadened your world and included other people who had not been in it. I liken it to when I was trying to get my daughter to try escargot. She wouldn't try it, she wouldn't try it, she wouldn't try it. Finally, she tried it. Oh, that's pretty good. I like it. All right. Well, had you tried it earlier, you could have been eating escargot a long time ago, right? But now you know. So exposing ourselves and getting ourselves out of the comfort zone is absolutely crucial, but it has to be in a no blame society. And we have to have ways to make sure that it's no blame. So sometimes having a moderator or somebody who's responsible to keep things on track and out of blame and fault is a good thing. But building teamwork, building camaraderie, something I learned in the Marine Corps is absolutely crucial to success. None of us can pull the boulder up the hill by ourselves. All of us can get it up there, but not just one of us. And the sooner we understand that, the more boulders we can pull up the hill. And that's something that I think every business is striving for, is how to be better, how to be more profitable, how to be more efficient. If you have happier people working, you have less turnover. If you have less turnover, you have less inefficiencies in terms of production. And you also have fewer expenditures that are needed for basic training. And you can spend all of your time and money on accelerated high level training that improves people's skills. We have to be willing to recognize that all people have talent, but not all people have opportunity. And if we provide all people with opportunity, then we'll have much more talent on the table. Have those conversations, invite people to participate. If you see people who aren't participating, have a private conversation and find out, hey, you're awfully quiet in these meetings. Why? Well, I'm not comfortable. Why aren't you comfortable? I think people think what I say is stupid or whatever the case may be. Invite them into the fold and make them feel important. As a manager, I believe very strongly that every manager who is able to take credit for something should bring out the people who actually did the work and let them take that bow too. And by doing that, you build camaraderie, you build what we call esprit de corps. And esprit de corps means that everybody has pride in the unit. And if you have pride in the unit, then you'll have pride in the people in the unit. So exposure, 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 understanding, conversation, and education. We have to educate ourselves about these issues because right now, a lot of people are working from lack of education, lack of knowledge, and working on suppositions and things they see on TV, 90% of which aren't true.
Absolutely. Thank you for that feedback directly for us on this period of growth. Now, over your career, you've driven bipartisan support with a calm, cordial attitude that led to over 87% of voters casting a vote for you in the 2015 mayoral reelection. What were some guiding principles that have driven this success and things that you could offer to the TreviPay team on driving that sort of successes?
Well, a couple of things that I think are really important in bipartisanship. One is civility and understanding that not everybody is of the same party, but even more basic than that, the things that we do on the city level have no real politics to them. I don't think the snow really cares whether or not the guy that's driving the plow is Republican or Democrat. It doesn't really matter. You can't divide up the resources of a city along Republican and Democratic lines. You have to provide for everyone. And when you do that and you don't emphasize politics, then all of a sudden you can bring people to the table to get things done. If you focus on the mission rather than on the people's attitudes who are performing the mission, you can get more done. Um, the mission is all important. Again, we're talking public service here. We're not talking politics. And when we're talking public service and you're in the public service business, then you should be willing to do those things that are going to provide the most service to the most of the public. And you can't do that if you won't work with a Republican, or you won't work with a Democrat, or you won't work with somebody who's black, you won't work with somebody who's a woman, because you're leaving out entire segments of the group that you're supposed to be serving. So focusing on the mission and convincing people that the end result of the mission, the goal of the mission, is to the benefit of us all, you, me, everybody else, all of a sudden you got people pulling in the same direction. And then also understanding that because people have different politics, they also have different ideas about how things should be done. Incorporate them, bring them in. What's your idea about how this gets done? Beat it out. And by doing that, if you bring people in who are maybe even opposed to what you're doing, and then you can convert them, now all of a sudden you've got less resistance outside. Perfect example. When we were going to the airport, and there was this huge raging debate about whether or not we should renovate, or whether or not we should build new, or whether or not we needed to do anything, we had one major critic who had a blog, and everything in the blog was how crazy we were, yada, yada, yada. So I appointed a commission of people to look at those issues. And I brought that person in and put them on that commission. Lo and behold, after being educated, his position changed somewhat. But bring them in. Let's hear what they've got to say, because they may be offering something good. And I always think that if you have all the people who object, not just the people who agree, in the same room, when you finally present your idea, then you've covered all the bases. And therefore, there's less to disagree about in the broader public. So that's how we did it, very simply. We focused on the mission, and we recognized that there were differences of approach, differences of desire, and we brought them in to have conversations and to work with them and to incorporate their thoughts into the overall process and into the overall result.
Yeah, mission is powerful, and especially when we share that mission, it allows folks to kind of see past some differences and, or unite for that greater good on things as well. Just one final question for you before we close things out today. Now, the TreviPay team is guided by 3 key values. You may see them over here on my background here for the Zoom meeting, but empathy, ingenuity, and tenacity. Which of these values have you felt most motivated by, and in what ways?
Actually, I'm motivated by all of them. I can't say any one in particular, because if you're not empathetic, you're not focused on other people. You're focused on yourself. And Lord knows we got enough people who believe in meism as opposed to weism. I believe in weism. Ingenuity, we have to find new ways to do things. We have to be willing and open to new approaches. The world is changing. And if you're not open to new things, then you're probably still using a rotary dial phone at home, or a flip phone in your pocket, even if you have one, and driving, 1956 Ford. If you're not open to ingenuity, if you're not willing to incorporate it, then you're simply going to do the same old things over and over the same way and get the same results. That's not satisfactory. It's bad business. It's bad in your personal life. And tenacity, I learned at a very early age. I got signed up for something. I thought I wanted to do it. I didn't really want to do it. Once I saw it, my father said, "You signed up for it. You're going to stick with it until it's over. And if it's over and you don't want to do it again, that's one thing, but you're not going to quit just because it wasn't what you thought it was or it got hard. Not going to quit." Those things also mirror what we talked about in the Marine Corps and what we live by in the Marine Corps. Improvise, adapt, and overcome. Same things, different words. And they all mean the same thing, that in order for you to succeed, you have to be willing, A, to make course corrections when things need to be changed. You have to adapt to changing circumstances, and you have to do everything in order to overcome. So all in all, I can't pick one, because with one is not sufficient. You can't just be empathetic and have no ingenuity or tenacity or any of the others. You have to be all 3. And they come to play in different times, different ways, and different circumstances. But you shouldn't be wanting when you need one of those traits and then you find that you don't have it. So the idea is to build those things into your life on a day-to-day basis with the people you work with the families that you raise, where you go to school, where you work. And that way you'll be a more complete adult. You'll be a better team member. You'll be a better worker. You'll be more productive. You'll be a better manager. There are absolutely core values to being human, in my opinion.
Thank you, Mr. James. These insights are absolutely invaluable today, and I really appreciate you joining us and making time to join us and share these insights for Diversity Week 2021. Especially, I wanted to say we admire your passion to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we really appreciate you joining us today. And I really hope that you have a great rest of your day and rest of your week. And I know you have a very busy schedule as well. To my TreviPay teammates, thank you for joining us today for this unique perspective and a Zoom meeting that we would really like to do in person at some point in the future. And also, we look forward to having you join tomorrow, the executive panel, where we have some of the folks amongst our leadership and from Coursera speak to us a little bit more about ways that we can be diverse and continue to win together. With that, we thank you again, Mr. James, for joining us this afternoon, and have a good rest of your day.
Kevin.
Thank you so much.
You too. Take care now.